Welcome to N-Weighing, our sound podcast. This is a grassroots podcast intended for those raising or helping to raise children in an Indigenous language.
A special shout out to the Indigenous Screen Office for making season 2 of N-Weighing possible. Getcha miigwech.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Nishnagigi.
I knew that was coming. Oh, Quendam. Shakana. Getcha nendam. Wad the Bajmo Yang for our listeners. Yeah, I'm just really excited. Gindash. Anishajiayan.
Pachigo, Mommy Quendam, Chinendam, Modus, Minoya, the Minamungio.
Okay. Are there any more synonyms in there? Pandora's box. So we have, this is a really unique episode for N-Weighing. My mic's way over here, so I have to talk into kind of to the side here. But guess what? You can see me. We have a really unique episode. I don't know what episode we're on now, 9th, 8th or something, but yeah, this is being recorded through video because we have two really awesome guests who we're gonna share space with, share capacity with through Zoom, through video, as they are OSL science. Like, I don't know if you wanted me to introduce them if you wanted to, but
This would be episode 10.
okay.
But yeah, we're putting this on video. We'll see how it turns out. And however it turns out, that's the way it was meant to be. But the reason why is because we have our guests, our OSL sign language speakers. Marsha Ireland and Dominique, her daughter Dominique Ireland, who are revitalizing the Oneida Sign Language. And they're language activists, and they've done many presentations. And I've seen them present a couple times, and I've just been blown away every time they present, and I think that's common thought among many people who've seen them present. And so I thought that they should definitely be on our podcast and share on our little platform that we have.
Don't get humble now. Just kidding. See, that's how I feel about it, but now that we have awesome people, not now, but not that we're not awesome people, but now that we've had season 2 with a bunch of amazing guests, I'm like, okay, I don't mind if we reach more ears because I want our guests' experiences and stories and journeys to be highlighted, and for that to reach more people.
Yeah. So I think their message is very important to share with people, and I know that it'll open people's minds, I hope, or I know it will, and I guess I hope as much as mine has. So yeah, I'm just excited for y'all listeners, y'all watchers, I guess, watching now.
Oh, you mean because of Zoom? I'm like, what is happening?
Yeah. So we recorded this on Zoom, and then we're gonna put it up on YouTube, and then
Yeah, Zoom seemed to be just the best for everyone when we were talking about logistics of how to make it happen because like we have interpreters as well and coordinate, you know, 6 people's lives, I guess one for us, but we both have separate stuff we have to worry about, you and I, Monty. So we all agreed that Zoom was going to be the best way to do this. And so, yeah, I'm really hoping that this, when it's published and it comes out, like when it's all been edited, and not that I don't even know how much editing we'll be able to do on it, but that it comes out really like that Zoom is it makes it watchable, and the footage is in good quality and stuff because I think this is going to be a really good episode. I'm stoked.
yeah. So we're still gonna release it on our podcast platform. So when
Through audio?
yeah, so you'll still
Are we
hear
now?
yeah. So you're
Okay,
still
there's a lot of editing for Emmeline. Just kidding. Well, there is, but
so you're still gonna hear it, but if you want the full experience of what we want to get the message across, because it is sign language, so to see that visual representation of it.
yeah, I highly recommend. Like, not that I want to be seen on video, but like, if you're listening to this, I'd find a screen somewhere and the link.
Yeah, and we'll
Most of
post
our episodes are on YouTube, right?
the audio. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
we,
this will just be through our YouTube platform as well.
yeah. So yeah, all of our episodes are audio posted on YouTube, but not visual posted. So
So lucky you. Now you get to know what we look like. Just kidding. You probably already did, but I've never recorded in my room before, in our room. So
all right.
bunch of
So
new stuff. No, very, very, very excited to get started here.
that much
Yeah, so we'll
time.
probably have to chop this until we get everybody figured out and then start. So yeah, Jimmy Wedge, stay tuned. Alrighty. Mashta Dana, should we start? Or are you just figuring
Yeah,
things out, Monty?
I think we should be good.
Okay.
So Gully.
I'm just going to interpret what I just said in Oneida Sign Language. I just said, hello, my name is Marsha. I am Oneida, Oneida Nation. I am of the Turtle Clan. Sigoli.
I'll just add on to what Marsha was saying. To know that Jillian will be interpreting for Marsha. Now in ASL, my name is Dominique. I am from Oneida Nation, member of the Turtle Clan. During this interview, the interpreter that will be interpreting for me is Seraphine.
Right, normally we say hello, and we'd love for you to introduce yourselves. So I really appreciate you starting us off.
And we'll
You,
add that you're from Oneida of the Thames in Ontario.
So thanks again for introducing yourselves. I can introduce myself just in case you don't already know, and for any fresh new viewers, I'll translate into English afterwards as well. Mashko gabadog indigo makoyandodem gaganashkodiak indibendagos dashkanzi being in Donjipanongwa. So my name is Emmeline. My spirit name is Mashko Gobwit, strong standing woman. My reserve is from Long Plain, Manitoba, and we're just so happy to have everyone here tonight, and we're really excited to get started. Monty, I don't know if you wanted to introduce yourself as well, or...
Bojo, Zaugi, Jigo, Gano, Indigo, Dashkanzi, Bing, and Dunjpa, Mishikendo, them, Monty Migaki, Shaganashi, Unikazia. So I just said my spirit name, Blue Sky Eagle. What else? I'm from Chippewas of the Thames First Nation. So our name for our area is Antler River in the language. And I'm Turtle
Okay,
Clan.
what was the first word before river?
Antler. Yeah, so Antler River.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'm excited for you guys to be here, and both of us are just happy you guys agreed to come on, and it's the first time we're doing this on kind of video recording, so we'll see how it turns out. Hopefully it turns out well, and yeah, just looking forward to sharing you guys sharing your story and getting that out to people.
I would just like to mention that this is our first experience doing a podcast interview as well, with the addition of discussing this topic as well. So I feel it's mutual benefit to be able to get this information out to the audience, as well as accessibility for us to tell our story and to have it more visible, and to hear our story, as well as, how, we could work together, and to have everybody see, from a different perspective as well.
Love that. That actually transitions really nicely into, we want to know what you're most comfortable and what is the most respectful terminology for the deaf community, what you prefer for us to use, / what you prefer.
Mom, would you like to respond?
Okay. I think that's a good question. Terminology, it's a big thing, especially with disability, deaf, hearing impaired, all of that kind of thing. It's something that our words are our medicine, and so it's really important to understand that the words that we use have such an impact, and have symbols and have understanding embedded into them, and it's all around us, whether it's spoken language or sign language. And so making sure that we are aware of that, and we can take that medicine and understand the difference between what we have and what was given to us with the English language, and knowing that they're not always the same and they're not always appropriate. I am deaf. That is how I identify, which doesn't mean what some people think it means, as in I can't do this, I can't hear, I can't drive, I can't work, I can't do all of this. That's not what that means for me. That's what often people think of when they hear the word deaf, but it's not a problem that I have. It's just a way that I communicate differently, is all that means to me.
Dominique, just saying, to add on to her comment, I feel very along the same lines, and doesn't mean that the word or terminology of deaf is like a bad or negative terminology, but just the common use of disabled, that's a colonial approach to it, a medical process and perspective. That is how they have set it up through their systems and how they process it. But in our view and within our community, we are, one moment for the interpreter. So, we have the responsibility to carry on our, teachings and our culture, and with the impact of settlers, meeting settlers is just the impact of the colonization. And so we are, what also would like to point out that we are not speaking out on behalf of, everybody that is deaf. Just more specifically, we would like to highlight, maybe accommodating, the person you are interacting with, right? This all belongs to who I am and my character and me as a person, not just as somebody that's deaf or just disabled, right? So, we don't, sometimes we are not all from the same community. And so sometimes I don't know anybody. I'm not from that community. I don't know that community, right? And so I focus on my community, my family traditions, and where my roots are. And so that just that shows, and that's my identity of, who I am and where I'm from. So I do not rely on the disabled community as a whole. I rely on my community. And so if I were to go ahead and say that I would prefer deaf, I'm also not really speaking on behalf of like necessarily just from that community, right? Sometimes you look at through the lens of like if you're interacting with a doctor, right? And he has to make some documentation in regards to my health, and that is a part of the documentation that is needing to be written in there, then that's fine. But for general, society or my daily interactions, sometimes if somebody asks me, I will just say I am Oneida. I will not add, specifically I am deaf or specifically I am disabled. Really, I just feel like those are just too many layers or terminology. Like I know who I am. And so when somebody asks me, I'll just simply reply I'm Oneida. And when I'm interacting with certain people and we discuss terms, sometimes, we are just content with understanding that our hands are our medicine, right? And we need to recognize that the way we communicate with sign language is medicine.
Thank you. Yeah, we really want to make sure that that is shared, and that it's an understanding that everyone can respect and honor. So I really appreciate the response, Monty.
Yeah, it's just I just think it's amazing and awesome, and I learn a lot every time I hear you speak. And I've heard you speak or do presentations at different venues or different events, and every time it kind of broadens my perspective on the world, and just even like the message of our hands are medicine, and just makes me very excited and wanting to learn more, and the unique sign language that you have of Oneida Sign Language. It's something that people, like that can hear are, we take that for granted. And so I'm really interested in like what are your journeys? Maybe I'll start with Marsha.
Monty, before you
Oh,
start, I don't mean to interrupt. Does anyone else like Seraphine, do you hear like a weird clicking?
Yes, I did hear
Your
it just a little bit.
mic is something's happening and your voice is lower and everything's clicking back and forth. I don't know if you need to replug in your earphones, your headphones, Monty.
okay, how's that?
I think it sounds better. I think it's okay now.
Okay, I I was
So it
holding
means
it.
we'll have to go back and say that question again, maybe?
Oh, the start of Monty's question, you mean?
Yes, because it had the tech. You were just mentioning how you have seen us give our presentations in
Yeah.
various settings and how you've learned something every time. So just if you could kind of maybe say that again, Monty.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to get my thoughts back in.
We're just really excited to have you on, and Monty was saying that I'm trying to help you reiterate a little, Monty. That you got to see Dominique and Marsha at some presentations, and you were just really excited to learn more. And you were kind of talking about that a little bit, and I was wanting to hear what you had to say as well.
Yeah, so every time I've seen you present, it's been given me a new perspective on communication and how us as hearing people, I guess, where we kind of take that for granted, and also how you present on Oneida Sign Language and what how unique that is, even compared to ASL and other forms of sign language. It just helps me, gives me perspective on how smart our people were and how we were able to have our own ways of living, our own ways of being, our own ways of communication. And so I wanted to, I guess, start with Marsha on how she, or how did you learn? How did you come across OSL, Oneida Sign Language, and your experience? I guess even like sharing your story of growing up, because I've heard you talk about that before, and I think it's really interesting, and I think be really interesting to share.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in the Oneida community, and my school at the time, I was supposed to go to a school for the deaf, but there was none available in Oneida, and the closest one was in London. But it was for very young children. It was about 4 years old, I think, when people were going there. And my parents thought, like, oh, I'm going to bring my child all the way here, this young, to learn sign language. And, a lot of the people there, they were talking about signs and things that, they were talking about farmers and they were talking, it was out in the country. And at that time, it was in 1963. And um, we had decided to go to a place close to Toronto that had a school set up there, and seeing the sign languages that were being used and trying to avoid using sign language within the school, and how they were trying to get children to speak, learn to speak by lip reading or having speech therapy. They would put us up close to a mirror and mouth different letters or sounds, like the word K, and you'd have to try to copy it. And seeing that and thinking, why do we have to be speaking? Why can we not just use sign language? Why can't we communicate in the way that we know how to communicate? And finger spelling, that was a big thing at that time too. Everything was finger spelled, so you would have to physically spell out every single word that you were communicating, which is really overwhelming, especially for a kid to try to understand. Later in the years, we started using signed exact English. So that was to help learn English grammar and things like that. And so it's a modified way of signing that you add in all of these grammatical functions into your signs, which is also really hard to understand. And I did that for about a year. And then afterwards, I learned American Sign Language, and that's what I used for a long time. However, I did feel like a big part of my own identity was missing, because when I would go back home to Oneida, I would see, all of these events happening. I would miss out on them because I was at school. And I didn't have access to understanding what it was. And it was really difficult. And I thought, I have to keep learning ASL. Like, this is what's been working. But anytime I would go home for events, if there was a workshop or if there was something happening, I'd always be very interested in it. However, I didn't have access to what was actually being said because I didn't have interpreters there. At that time, Chief and Council, I had approached them about providing interpreters for me to be involved in the community, and I was denied again and again. But I was very stubborn, and I kept advocating for myself because I knew that communication was a right that I had, and that I should be able to access this. And so finally, it paid off. They hired an interpreter to come to a workshop that I wanted to attend. However, they were only speaking Oneida at the workshop, and the interpreter that came did not understand it, of course, and so they were not able to interpret for me. And it kind of made me realize, in our community, we have elders. There's one elder named Olive that I had gone up to and said, we have an interpreter here, but they're not able to understand when we speak Oneida. Are we not able to do this in English? And Olive looked to me and said, no, you are Oneida. You are a part of our nation, and it's something that you should have access to. The interpreters don't understand what is going on, and she kind of helped me come to the idea of, maybe we should try to develop the sign language that is ours for our own community. And immediately when she mentioned that, I felt such an inspiration, realizing that my community, my rights are being acknowledged, my connection to the community is being validated, and it was really, really empowering. And I just thought, if you're not going to let me use this, or if you're not going to allow me access to this, then we're going to create access in a different way. Because it's not just me. There are other deaf people that are in our community too. And thankfully, we have made a lot of changes, and we have incorporated a lot too. But it's been a very big learning journey that we've gone through, learning how to look at the English or the ASL signs that we have, but then come up with an appropriate cultural representation of that in Oneida Sign Language. Because we don't want to look at an English translation of what our words mean. We have to look at what they actually mean in a visual context that we could explain. And so trying to fully disconnect from English and ASL and really focus on our own culture, and what communication looks like for our people historically has been really amazing, and it's really flourished. And we've gotten so far with this. And it's been really nice to see how we've been able to decolonize ourselves, even decolonize our own culture, and have our children learn with us. Because you look back in history, it's hard to find a lot of this kind of thing. And so being able to do this together, and have access to that, and experiencing oppression, within other communities, it's very, very difficult. And so being able to reclaim that and really advocate for it within our own community and have it grow to the extent that it has been really, really amazing. And also the opportunity not only to share it with our community, but with other communities. So traveling, doing these presentations, like you've mentioned, you've seen, and seeing the support that people have for our language, and understanding, where we started from, where we're being forced to learn to speak or learn to write English or learn to do all this kind of stuff, and realizing that no, when we disconnect from that, we realize that our hands actually are language. Our hands give us the ability to communicate. And when people can see it from that perspective, rather than seeing it as a disability or something else, and they can see what the benefit of learning sign languages are and the importance behind it, is really, really amazing.
Wow, I'm just like already blown away. That was really powerful, and I like incredible hearing. I wasn't too sure myself on like how OSL came to be. So hearing how you made that happen, and with the help of and support of others within your community, like is so inspirational. I don't want to. I'll Monty, if you have anything to add before we ask Dominique, but so we'd like to ask Dominique the same question, a little bit about your journey, and yeah, how, like, whether you want to start in childhood or as a young adult, wherever you feel is appropriate, on your journey.
Yes, I'll try to be brief. I just would like to clarify one thing. Some individuals will admit they didn't really know or didn't understand, but some, like to try to reflect a little deeper and try to figure out the reason why, and research the history. And it really is a historical impact, and it's not easy, to break through and bring this to fruition, right? But within the community and the disabled, right? Just because with the historical context, with, the council, with the government, with colonial processes, they were just very strict. Like, you can't do this, have to, go to school to get certain education, but then you can't go to post-secondary, right? So there was a lot of barriers, and historically, and specifically with individuals who are deaf and being allowed to sign, not being provided interpreters, not having closed captioning, just a lot of accessibility barriers. And they had really no access to really anything in that sense of accessibility. And so we are still limited on the knowledge we acquire. We don't have a full understanding of everything historically. There are still pieces missing, right? And so sometimes use storytelling or, through certain things that are passed on, we are not given the opportunity to learn every single piece, right? We have to, growing up, had to, learn and struggle and kind of suffer to acquire any historical information, and, suffer with self-confidence, right? It was a struggle. and to recognize that there are advocates and people who are saying this isn't right, and standing up and advocating for, what is right, and to get laws changed and to make that progress. So when I was a child with my family and with extended family, with my cousins and my aunts, and after, once I was born, my first language was sign language. And growing up, I felt like, what I do, like, have accessibility, right? I do know my family. So I felt, in the sense of the word normal in my childhood growing up. And, everything was as per usual, as you expected, go to school, when I went, it was everything I expected in the sense of a classroom, my peers. And just as, time went along, I was, being encouraged, to have a little more independence. And so I used to be very, very like close with my cousins and be with them all the time. And so what we really enjoyed and had fun, it was just, kind of horse playing around, kind of like, doing little skits or, drama pieces, right? And so when we'd get together as a family, we would always create stories. And, we would just interact, making up these stories. And so I was encouraged, like, what about your friends? And I was saying, yeah, like when I go to school and I'm hanging out with my friends, I will tell them, I'll sign to them and tell them the stories. And so then, if I go over to their house or go to a birthday party or, such social event, with their parents, right? Like I'm busy as a child, just, playing around, right? Not really paying attention to, the parents per se, but, with my friends' parents, or other adults, I didn't even realize, but I was quite shocked that in their households, they had no signing in their household, and my friends, they signed themselves, but when they went back home, they were forced to be more oral and speak, right? And at that point, I realized that they had that disconnect in their home, and they didn't have that full relationship connection through language. And so, when I'd be back home, and we knew in our extended family, sorry, one moment for the interpreter. So we knew, like, those kids who never wanted to go back home, it was because they didn't have the language in their homes, the signing, right? And noticed as I was growing up that my friends always wanted to come over to my house. Everybody wanted to come, and I would be like, why? And they're like, oh, you're lucky, you have family, your siblings, your cousins, they all understand and they all sign. And they were just very eager and thirsty for that type of access and language use. And I didn't realize that right away, right? That they had homes and families that did not have signing within their homes, or their adults within their family who chose that said, I'm not going to sign, right? So through my childhood growing up, I often get people who tell me, oh, you're so lucky, you come from a deaf family, you have your language, you have accessibility from a very early age. So many people telling me, you are so lucky, you are so lucky. And realizing that from their perspective, they didn't have that same exposure to language due to just their family all being hearing, or their limits to accessibility as they grew up. And I had a really good friend who I'd go visit often. They would come over to my house often because her mom would visit the school often, and I saw her mom that she signed pretty well, and she would sign to everybody and her daughter. So when I'd visit, the grandmother signed at my friend's house, and then her auntie was signing as well. So I was like, oh wow, this is the one classmate who has multiple adults in their home that can sign fluently and have that language to communicate. When I go, visit other friends, they, wouldn't have that same language use within their home. And some lived quite far away from the school. And so sometimes when I'd go visit them, I'd be like, oh, you know, this is what you quote unquote like is a normal family, right? And then, you know, you get to see other friends, their dynamics in the household, and you kind of start to realize like, oh, that's not so great, and kind of seeing the complete opposites, you know, of households, right? So you know, when we were graduating high school and, you know, getting ready to be out in the real world, I seen, you know, what I experienced and seen going through the deaf school and the high school. And just in the sense of the word of communication, I understood what that meant to be able to communicate within that setting. And then when I, you know, go out to, you know, like a work setting or to an appointment, I didn't even realize the fluctuation of type of communication, right? I would often get, you know, like, oh, you're deaf, right? And so I just, it was almost felt like it was a little bit insulting, but it was just like, it wasn't the first time like they've come across a deaf individual, right? So and just recognizing that with communication, right, that you do need, both parties need language to communicate, right? And so it didn't even come across to me that other people didn't view using sign language as a language, right? So you try to explain, you know, whatever your utterance is very clearly. And sometimes the response I get from certain individuals, like, just didn't make sense with what I asked, right? So just in communicating with various people, you know, sometimes people say, oh, like they're, you know, very limited in their ability to communicate, right? But in actuality, they had, you know, they were very smart and they were able to explain, you know, a high level, you know, of a certain topic, right? So to hearing individuals who don't sign or don't understand the language, how it is, you know, structured in the grammar, they have that lens on it, you know. And so when I taken this into it as a leadership role and, you know, to kind of take on this role and explain, you know, sometimes it's like, one moment for the interpreter. About language deprivation for other deaf individuals who don't have as much of the language exposure, right? They label them with language deprivation, but then when they grow up with the language, right, there is proof that there is that understanding that they do have language. So just try to understand what the actual word of language and what that is definition of the meaning is for each individual. And so sometimes, you know, somebody will say, oh, I notice you are very strong in your ASL skills. And I'll tell them, yes, you know, because I come from a deaf family. And they're like, oh, that explains it. And they're like, did you go to the deaf school? And I'll respond with, yes, I did. And they'll ask me what age did I go to school? And I would say kindergarten. And they said, oh, you went to school early, right? And so for me, I am very bilingual. I'm very strong in English as well as ASL. I have strong roots in both languages, whereas a later language acquisition deaf individual may be picking up language at 15 years old at high school age. It's almost, you know, a little too late at that point, so they're not as strong. Whereas for me, it was right, you know, from birth and right, you know, at the start of my childhood. And so sometimes, you know, people will ask, you know, what are the resources or what's the best way to go about it? And for me, it's just like, well, it's because my family has given the exposure of language because they signed in the home, right? So how am I picking up on certain contexts or certain concepts because I'm watching my family discuss it, right? At various, family functions, whether we're having dinner or if we're out at events, sometimes I'm just watching, everyone else discuss it, right? But some people think I'm book smart. I've learned it all myself reading or online or watching videos, that's how I've come to acquire this knowledge. But my answer is no. It's through my family's conversations and exposure to language. If that was not a factor, I would definitely be an individual who is language maybe delayed or maybe out on certain information that is discussed in, everyday concepts or scenarios. And so, one more for the interpreter. So I was with, somebody who, we were discussing OSL as they were discussing the Oneida language, right? And trying to learn, right? So we try, instead of, I suggested that they join, other hearing people who know how to pronunciate, the language properly. And so we just benefit each other by giving, our knowledge to each other and supporting each other. And so I just like to try to, just look at in theory, right, before, contact, right, what would happen, right? If you came across somebody you couldn't communicate with, there's certain things that would happen or would go wrong, right? Or you'd miss out the information, right? And so you would have like missing pieces of a puzzle, right? So if you look at it through that lens, and it's quite a struggle because you're always missing quite a few of the pieces of the puzzle, right? And so one second, sorry, I think just was asking, what was like before I was born, right? And they were saying like there was no interpreters, there was no closed caption, right? And so, I feel like if there was never any progression or change, right, then that wouldn't have been like passed down to me, right? So I feel like that is a sense of, some type of healing. And without healing, it's impossible to grow, right? So for us to heal, it helps us to, feel better, to become more stable. And, if there's, constant problems or constant like toxic scenarios that, won't contribute, to growth or progression, and that is not my goal.
If I can add to that, Marsha's saying, I think what Dominique is talking about kind of made me think that's exactly our ways as Indigenous people. I know on my dad's side of the family, and my great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather, that whole line are very fluent Oneida language speakers. And that has been passed down through the family. For those that can hear, obviously, that is passed down through the generations all the way until my dad. But when I was born, of course, he has this daughter who is deaf. There was a shift there that had to happen that they acknowledged the way that I communicate with my movements, with being able to show them things. There was things that I was able to get across just intuitively, that we learned together. And my mother had really, really wonderful English. She was very well versed in that. And, would always get on my father about that because he did not have great English. And so when it came time for me to start learning English and written English, I definitely kind of had the same perspective that my father had about it, where it was like, no, we don't really care about this as much because we have our language. I thought I have my sign language. I have my hands. I have my body that I can use to communicate. That's not something that we've ever done historically, is writing things down or using the English language to communicate. So why is it something that I have to focus on now? my body, my hands, that's what helps me to heal from all of the trauma that I had from having to learn how to speak, how to use English. This is my healing, being able to use my language and being able to use my eyes to take in the world the way that I do, and learn about different things. You know, my dad worked as an iron worker and was a really big, tough man that was a very hard worker. And, you know, being able to see that, I really embraced it in who I am as well, because I was able to see that I had access to that visual nature. And it caused me to be a really strong and tough woman. And, you know, people often think like, oh, I'm such a tiny little, tiny little lady. But no, I've got this personality that is big and strong, just like my dad was, because I took it in that way. And it's something that I learned through my own experience. And, you know, we had our own communication that gave me more of those kinds of skills. You know, if my dad, he was very proud of that. He was very proud to point out that, oh yeah, that's my daughter Marsha over there. That's the one that's doing all this stuff. And it's because I took it in that I was still able to access it, even with the language difference and the fact that I wasn't a fluent Oneida speaker. But it's because the meaning of it, the understanding is still there without the English language being necessary for it, or American Sign Language. I'm still able to be involved. I'm still able to see all of these things. I can still take things in and share them with people in different ways and carry on our culture and our stories. It doesn't have to be through English or through the school system or through the ways that we've been told it has to happen. And it's something that I've always thought, oh my goodness, English, like you're so keen on learning this language, but we have it already. We have our own language already. I always try to avoid it. You know, and people say like, oh, like, but speaking is a privilege. It's something that's really great. But where did that come from? It's because the churches told us that. That's what we were told when they took our families. And so by believing that, it's just continuing on that whole process that they were doing. You don't have to convince me. I already know who I am, my language, and how it helps me and how it enables me to live my culture. I don't need what everybody else is telling me that I need for that. But hearing people often don't understand, but they do see the strength that comes through me, you know, the like, oh, that's Marsha, that's someone, she's always going to speak up about something, but you have to understand where that comes from. It's because I can feel it all. It's been communicated to me. That's my truth. That's my experience. That's who I am. And it's because I don't have to hear it. I can see it. I don't have to hear it through the English language. It's in me already. And, you know, I think we overthink this kind of stuff a lot and we overanalyze it, and it's causing like a reduced number of people who are able to really understand and learn our culture. But that's why we have to advocate so much for it and advocate for our languages and advocate for our traditions. You know, I think I am very privileged because Creator gave me this gift of being deaf, being the person that can take all this in, and I can show others that it is possible and that I am a very competent person and I don't need to rely on what people think you have to rely on to be able to be successful in that. I have my own people, my own culture, my own ways of life that I inherently already know. I don't need to be told how that happens. I don't need to convince other people of that. I'm here to share that with youth so that as they grow up, they can understand and know that too. And that's why I'm so passionate about doing presentations as well.
And Dominique, saying just to add comment to that, I just want to kind of go backtrack a little bit and say I would like to, you know, try my best and use all my capabilities to, you know, do the appropriate, you know, approach, right? And what's best, right? We don't always have to rely on documentation and books. We can utilize, you know, storytelling to see through action or through workshops or, you know, networking and meeting, you know, other individuals and just communicating with other people in general And so I feel like when you take those experiences, and I reflect on my mom and her OSL signs, and thinking about working with our community, it's a very slow process. It's not something that is quickly in process. Sometimes when we go through certain signs or certain meanings, and then we come to that final decision of the outcome and what it is in sign language, it's so clear to our community, and everybody's like, oh, it's so clear, I totally get it. And it just influences that it's just a clear communication and everybody's with the same understanding. And so when you have that clear understanding, that structure, in terms of researching like the structure of the language, that is really kind of held on like the last part of the process, right? At first, you're going to be confused, or you're not going to fully have clear understanding, right? And that personal interaction with individuals is very important as well. And so we take feedback, we take workshops, and really just all of that has had nothing but positive impact and connection, and it's really opened our eyes and opened our brains and to things that we might not have noticed before, may have missed. And so we have noticed the impact is great. And so when we do going through the process, it feels right. And there's no other way to explain it. When it connects and feels right, we have witnessed that like with internally as well as with other individuals in our community. And sometimes when I'm communicating with other people in ASL, I'll use ASL for, general conversation, in certain settings to socialize. But then when I switch over to discussing certain issues, wanting to recognize rights or go into historical context, I will switch over and use OSL, Oneida Sign Language. And so I just want to be clear that OSL is, that's where I say our representation of our hands, our medicine. We have that connection. And for hearing people, it's oral spoken language, but for us, it's very similar. We are discussing languages, right? So my, my First Nations language, right? And that's the connection. That's a part of our identity. That is natural, right? And so just all of these reasons and that connection. And so that's what's led to, that's our right? So I've gone to workshops, I've gone to conferences, I've met, various individuals who research language. And so just, having all of these, discussions or feelings and just becomes clear, right? So when I went to a conference, I can't remember what they were saying. It was in Vancouver, BC. I can't remember exactly, but it was Indigenous language, like global, international Indigenous language. And so they were saying in your journey in revitalizing your Indigenous language, right? Like you want to protect it and not rely on English, right? So if you have, like somebody did suggest, why don't you utilize American Sign Language while you're learning the spoken and revitalizing spoken Indigenous languages? And so certain hearing people are, kind of taken to that, but they have not done enough research on American Sign Language or sign language in general, and the language and the context. They really have not researched any of that at all. They just utilizing American Sign Language at the basic level as using this sign to represent this spoken word in their Indigenous language. And so, I have experience. I've used the language my whole life. I've used it at the deaf school and communicating with other people, and it's a very, full language. And so there's like historical and there's meanings behind everything in itself as a language. And so just when you're, setting out a curriculum for American Sign Language, right, you need to know the structure and you need to have certain understandings of the language. So when hearing people are using it to support revitalizing Indigenous language, they have no curriculum they're following. They're just looking up videos, they're following videos. And so with ASL, you have to do the research on who the historical, where the language comes from. Where was it derived from, right? It is actually derived from other languages, right? So I think there was a term where they use like tree language, right? Where you come together and have, a certain discussion and to making certain decisions. And who are those individuals that were involved historically? They are not Indigenous people, right? So, but now hearing Indigenous people are utilizing basic ASL to help revitalize spoken Indigenous language. But I asked them, where is like the foundation? Where is, the historical context, the family traditions, right? ASL is not a part of your family traditional teachings, right? And so you're allowing it to come into contact with your family traditions and your culture, right? But there is no, natural ASL within it, right? And so I do want to support, like ASL does not support like Mother Nature or, certain aspects of our culture. And so they're saying it's utilized to like, to build off of, right? And when you're using ASL and an interpreter, right, they are actually mediating between two languages. They have, like, there's a relationship built between ASL and English, right? So when you are looking at our languages, you don't want English involved, which is fine. It's a great concept, right? But then they're willing to have American Sign Language affiliated with revitalization, but that will inherently impact and influence our language. And how is that not viewed in a negative light? So it's confusing for me. And so with OSL and our progress and our process, we are heavily researching, the understanding and the meanings behind it. I'm Oneida, my mother is Oneida. We learn our family, traditions, what is passed down, the structure of the community. And so we understand, like how certain things, are in our cultural lens, right? And so we have firsthand lived experience we understand how things, function with our community, how the roles are, set up, right? So we have that firsthand experience and knowledge and understanding. We are connected to our community. We do interact and have those conversations with our community. We are not borrowing from other people's experiences or from other people's stories, right? That's not our point, right? We're relying on my own experiences and my knowledge and my mother's experiences and her story, right? And so with our creation story, and what it teaches us, and I'm always reanalyzing our creation story. In the creation story, it never states that there should be any like negativity or shame or you look down. There's no criticism. There's nothing mentioned in there. It doesn't say that, there's limitations, right? It doesn't have any of that negative lens in it at all. so we, feel empowered, right? We are able to interact in that lens. And so with American Sign Language, it has its own history and it has its own influences, from the medical perspective, right? And how at the beginning it's very limited. And they almost had to go off in a corner and hide when they were using American Sign Language, like almost like the concept of like going into a cave, right? Because it was banned and it was not allowed to be used and it was looked down upon. So it has its own struggles. It, if I want, do I want to bring that historical context into my work or, revitalizing our languages? No, I don't want to have that impact on our work. And so we are relying on, with our own being, our own identity, our own community. And so communication requires another individual and requires that interaction to have successful communication. And so for me, I prioritize the creation story and that historical teaching of, your mothers, your grandmothers, your great grandmothers, and having that traditions and stories carried forward. And so that is great, strength and power to rely on and to deep dig within yourself because it is passed on to you. And in comparison to utilizing another language that has its own history and it's I don't know how healing while utilizing that as a tool, it would not help. But my goal is to heal in this process and to be empowered, right? Because we have historically been told, no, we cannot share our stories. No, we cannot do this, parts of our culture, right? So a lot of people just aren't realizing it, right? They think it's a positive thing to do. And with Oneida Sign Language, we are actually not allowing any of those other tools and various languages to impact our process and our language. And so we are in this moment of history where we have professional interpreters, we have closed captioning. And so now, I have opportunity to be able to stand up, and to have, access and be able to state a comment, right? So if, there's other workshops or other videos or things in regards to the Indian Act, I'm able to have access to those things due to closed captioning or interpreters, right? And I'm able to see what people are speaking up about and hear all the comments and to know that I have those same rights. And before colonization, that we were here first, right? And so I'm always emphasizing, that it's the focus is for us and we have our rights, so, and I have the right for communications, I don't have to follow the medical lens perspective. You cannot tell me how I should communicate. I am the one that's in control of that process. And how I move forward is working on OSL and progressing it from here on into the future.
Thank you so much for, oh, I'll just go a little closer. Yeah, thank you so much for all of that. I should have taken some notes to remember. I had a couple of things I wanted to ask you and clarify on, and I just was taking in every moment. But I really appreciate all of the reframing that you did around the lens and explaining the process and the length of time it took and sharing others' experiences. Because like you said, as a hearing person, in my head I'm thinking, why wouldn't all families, want to try and communicate through the same language as their child? So I really appreciate all of the insights as I learn, because I I have always had a yearning to actually learn a language like ASL. And then you talk about OSL, and I'm like, oh, I know I'm not Oneida, but like I would definitely be way more interested in learning OSL at this point. After, definitely do not have the same experiences, but there are a lot of I don't want to say a lot, but there's several commonalities between when you talk about trying to learn, like when you spoke on sometimes you don't have enough information to truly understand what's being spoken about yet if you are not well versed in that area. And I know, this is a drop in the bucket of being able to maybe resonate with that, but when you learn Anishinaabe through immersion, sometimes they don't have all the words, and so you can associate what's being told to you with a different, a different word altogether. So I wanted to be present, but I should have wrote some of my questions down as they were coming up. I'll send it over to Monty in case he has anything that he would like to add or ask.
Yeah, no, I think everything that both of you shared was just it's really important and really good to hear. And yeah, just a lot to reflect on. Same thing, just so much important knowledge to share. And I'll have to listen to this again later on to really absorb everything. But yeah, just talking about like using ASL, like I know I'm familiar with, people using ASL to help revitalize our indigenous languages. And just hearing that, like, from you about, that perspective of ASL and how that is similar to English and how that can bring a different worldview into an indigenous language that isn't ours, I guess. But yeah, I'm curious if you could share some examples of some of the differences between OSL and ASL, just to kind of give people and talk about that. I don't know if you can define OSL a little bit, but try just, I guess, kind of talk about the differences and how that reflects our worldview.
Yes, just before we can show those various examples, for myself, in my experience growing up, ASL grammar and the structure it's based on levels of skill and knowledge. So it has a set curriculum already. And it does have an emphasis to focus on gender. And whereas Indigenous culture, we don't focus on gender, right? We're very neutral and we don't tie it into that gender norm. And ASL does have the language structured with being gender specific. So when you see certain ASL signs, you'll gain the understanding of what I'm talking about. So for just a quick review, so anything in the forehead area of the head is for male. So father, uncle, male cousin is at the forehead. That's for the man. Again, it's always repeatedly in that forehead to the side of your top part of your head. For a female, it's based on around your chin area, just to the side. So that's mother, aunt, grandmother, right? So that's how the language was set up, and the purpose of it is tied to the genders. And so I understand ASL and its language and the roots. I focused on the root word and how, you know, it visually, how it visually looks and what it represents, right? So sometimes there's certain ways where I want to see like how somebody responds, right? And so I realized that within our OSL, right, it's we're not rooting our signs into a specific area. Like we have more flexibility. Whereas ASL, you have certain spaces you utilize with certain signs because it has its own meaning and intention. But ours is more flexible, more movement. There's no signs that are tied to certain spaces or in around you or on your body. And so it really does depend on, like, you know, just traditionally, right, and how it's being passed on, right, and what's the intent, right? Sometimes there's a lot of traditions or knowledge that is action based, right? And so it's like if I'm learning or hearing to one of our stories and I'm trying to, you know, picture what would you do, what activity, or how would you, you know, see that, right? And so in our culture, I notice there's a lot of action possible, right? So in our language, there's nothing that says like the story that says the word say, right? It's just a story that they tell, right? And so whereas with ASL, they do have those markers, like even within a story, right? So I just notice and see the differences between the languages. So the structure approach, you know, whether it's a deaf individual or a hearing person, right? So sometimes like in your intro, it'd be like, oh, hi, my name is, and you know, you would continue to sign your introduction, right? Sometimes through that interaction, you're like trying to understand, is this signer deaf person or is this person a child of a deaf adult, right? You're trying to pick up on their accent as they're signing, right? And so you know, within our language, it's very sound based, right? And so, um, just, you know, when I'm introducing myself, that's how I came with the choice of how you express that in OSL because it's coming from within, right? So it's coming out of me. And within conversations and how it sounds and how they use that, their tongue when they speak certain things, right? So I usually can tell, oh, that's a hearing person, right? Whereas if I see somebody do what I just signed as an example, to me, I can tell, oh, that person is deaf. So there's just different markers and different cues that kind of help and show and identify the origin of the speaker. And now, go ahead, Marsha.
So I'll just show the signs in OSL now.
Dominique's saying, I'm going to do ASL, and Marsha's doing OSL. Have.
Okay.
The reason that OSL has that sign have is based on our basket, you know, when they make a basket and the handles on it, right? So if you're going to harvest corn, you know, and you're taking it out from that basket from behind you. And so it's based off of those straps that are attached to that basket. And so that's why the sign is in that location and with that motion. Ceremony. So when I sign the ASL version for ceremony, you know, usually your context with that is like it's a celebration, right? It's like, you know, you have kind of like that pole of like, you know, it's like a flag of celebration, right? So really, OSL is based on the cultural meaning.
Yeah, so in our community, our ceremonies always include a fire that is at the center of everything. So we show the fire and then the people surrounding that. And then we've got this sign here that shows what we are telling to the fire. And that what we're telling to the fire goes up to Creator in the smoke. So that's why that is our sign for ceremony.
I mean, it's just mind blowing for me because and I'm even getting emotional because even in English, when you're talking, like if I'm talking to a non-Indigenous person about ceremony, they hear something totally different than if I'm talking about, oh, I'm going to ceremony. They like I have to explain, oh, like no, I'm not going to a ceremony where there's this. I'm like I'm going to ceremony, or even when we say the language is like if I said, oh, learning the language to a non-Indigenous person, they're like, well, what language? And for us, it's like, oh, it's the language. It's Anishinaabe. We know what we're talking about. Just little small subtle cues. So I really see that when you're explaining, okay, like I'm really starting to understand deeper. Like it's the actual action of, you're talking about the celebration and the pole and how like that's not relevant necessarily. Like that's total. The context isn't the same. I would assume, right? So again, I feel a lot. I feel very deeply. So as you're explaining this, I'm like, just excuse me because I'm getting emotional because I can just really feel it. And like you said, your language is so, like you said, fluid and flexible. And again, that just I know Oneida culture is very, very different than an Anishinaabe culture, but like we consider the language to be alive. Like it is this mobile, ever moving thing. So again, I'm resonating a lot with what you're saying or what you're signing, because like even though it's we're speaking our language, I can really I can't understand, but I can resonate with some of those parallels through revitalization. And there's something else I wanted to mention, but it'll come back to me as we speak. But yeah, uh, oh, sorry.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. The fourth sign I'll show now, Marsha's saying.
Green. So with the OSL, it's the focus on the cultural meaning on when you grow up and where you're seeing the color and you see it so often, right? Like for example, green, blue, yellow, orange, black, gray. I usually understand the OSL, right? Like in ASL, it's structured based on the first letter of those colors, right? So for like, for B, right? That's the handshake for the letter B. But through movement, like you can become a classifier, right? So that's the classifier using the hand shape of the B, but it's moving. That makes it a classifier in ASL. And so same with when you use the letter G, that's the hand shape for the letter G in ASL. And when you're talking about the color, when you move it, that's how you know they're talking about the color in ASL.
Okay.
And so that's the letter Y, just the letter in ASL. But again, as you move it, it becomes the color. So that's how you sign yellow, right? And so I, have learned that, with ASL, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's alive. I'm just like, oh, okay, that's the sign. I have to use it. So I use it, right? But when we are looking at our culture and Oneida Sign Language, we must sign with connection. We focus on the root word, the structure. So for example, my cousin, one second, my cousin, and they were saying, that color, we see it in nature, right? The sky, right? So that's why we say blue, right? If it's dark, we'll say it's, black, right? The grass, it's green, and brown, so in that discussion and communication of that, that's where it became so visual and was being able to connect it to nature, and then became very clear in the understanding. And so for our future generations, children, we would like to teach them OSL and our signs for color in OSL and focus on our teachings in relations to the colors. And I feel like children totally understand, they'll be able to understand that connection with nature and be better approach rather than how you are taught it in the English language, and so we are signing, we can notice when there's that disconnect, when the signs are not alive, right? So when it's not rooted in that connection, we can tell and we can feel it. So I'll give you another example. So when you guys are listening and there's, you're listening to sound, for hearing people, sometimes you don't like certain sounds that are complex, or, sometimes, there's certain sound that you don't like, you'll kind of turn it down or turn it off, like it bothers you. It's very distracting, gets very annoying, and you're like, get rid of it, turn that off, right? That feeling. So, for if there's, something that's blinking constantly, we want to turn that off, right? So, and then if you can't, you start to get those feelings of like, oh, that's annoying. I just want that to stop. I want it to turn off, right? It's intrusive, right? But it's kind of just ongoing. So another person might not care and they don't even notice it, right? And they don't even realize that sound is intrusive, and they don't see how it affects you. They don't see how it's becoming annoying and those feelings inside of you are festering. And then, sometimes you have to, say, directly, like, can that be turned off, right? But that person has no realization. They don't even realize it. They don't even pick up on any of the cues, right? So that, you kind of have to explain, but then that person just kind of doesn't even notice it, right? It just goes right over their head. That's kind of how it feels like for us, with signing, right? So, just how you guys don't like the certain noises, that distraction, that disconnect is intrusive. That's, it's very similar to how I explain how we can feel, right? So when you guys don't like a sound that is ongoing, you start to feel that discontent, that intrusiveness, right? So if we see, people playing with signs and making up signs, and they don't have that full understanding of the historical context, and they just look at it as it's like we're just playing with it, we're just throwing it out there, that's the same kind of feelings that start up within us, and becomes annoying and intrusive, and you get that feeling stirring up of that you don't like it.
Sorry, so to clarify, the intrusiveness is is more when people are trying to like throw or make up signs on the spot that are really like that, I guess like without the context or without like I guess like the ignorance of what of the history of learning it. Is that kind of correct? Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. I'm someone who needs a lot of clarification all the time. I think remember we spoke about that the last time I was here. So sometimes I have to hear something two or three times to understand.
No problem at all. Anytime you have a question, please go ahead and ask.
Thank you. Are you
Oh,
okay?
what are some like is there anything that people are surprised about OSL or even other deaf people in the deaf community? Are they surprised? What are kind of some common things? Is there like a yeah that they're surprised OSL exists or I know there's other types of sign language out there, but do you usually get questions or like comments about OSL?
I'll let mom, everyone always, it goes to her, so I'll let her answer.
Yeah, well, I think OSL in spaces when you're giving thanks for something. Um, I often will say my comments to people, and if I'm in front of an audience or something and everybody's looking at me, and I'll look, and after I've shown it, I get really surprised because you can see everybody's like, "Oh, I'm picking up on what that means," and they can see like the understanding happen with people once you've explained it to them. Um, and then when you compare it side by side, like we just did, the ASL and the OSL, and how people really respond to the OSL and saying like, "Oh, that makes so much more sense." Like it's very clear, especially like when you're picking the berries, for example. That sign for that, they say it's so much more clear when you're getting cranberries in our culture. Um, and then when you're talking about um, yeah. You can see that understanding happen in people when I've done my presentations and when you see that moment of clarity that they get. And it's particularly with Indigenous hearing people watching these presentations, you can see that same feeling that you talked about. You get chills a lot of the time because you explain how ASL is not our way and it's very different from the way that we are trying to advocate for. And our language is not as intrusive as you mentioned, and it can be really inspiring to a lot of hearing Indigenous people because they're able to see a different perspective of, when we sign mother like this. Um, I'll do the sign and people will ask, "What's that?" And they say, "Oh my goodness." And I'll explain that, ASL, as Dominique mentioned, mother is signed on the chin because it goes by the area. But in our sign, it's signed on the breast because that is where life is given from. That is where the mother nourishes her child. That is her whole identity is from the breast like that. Same thing with great grandmother. If you're talking about great grandmother, it's on the shoulder and then on the breast. However many times you tap it on the shoulder can indicate like a great grandmother, a great great grandmother. But that's because that's what you see our great grandmothers and our great great grandmothers doing. They'll put their hand on your shoulder and check in on how you're doing. They've got their canes or something that they're walking with, and they always come up and lean on you. It's really indicative of the way that we see things. ASL, you go grandmother from your chin like this, but it doesn't make sense when you think about what it actually looks like when you're living in relation with these people. These are humans. It's not things that we can just place in a space and have the meaning come through. We really want to connect our language to what it means and what we live through. So when we see a tree, for example, and you see the sun or the moon, it would look like this. We focus very much on what it means in our culture and what it looks like. And then different stars. ASL, the signs are very, very cold almost. It's just symbols and signs that have been created to try to show it, but it doesn't actually show the experience of what it's like to live with these things, to experience being in the sun or in the moon. And you know, we really do try to connect that emotion to our signs because it's true. It's that's our life. That's our connection. English and ASL are very different, and they often leave those things out and devalue them. But that's part of why I have such a resistance to using ASL or English because it is so disconnected. It is so isolating. I do understand that Indigenous hearing people, when they watch my presentation, they get that shared understanding because it is our culture, it is our ways, and we have that shared experience of being colonized by English, and so seeing other ways that we can kind of get away from that has been really inspiring for a lot of people, and I think they're very taken by the signs that we show them, and you know, some people might think it's almost like a show or like a song or it's got some kind of poetic feeling to it. But you know, we it's because we portray these emotions when we're talking about the drums, for example. You know, people sign drum like this, but that's not what it looks like in my culture. I show exactly what kind of drums we use and how it what the motion looks like to use it because that is the connection we have. That's the way that we live it. And I think Indigenous hearing people really can relate to that and feel inspired by it a lot of the time.
And I would just like to add that when I go to workshops or when I'm asked to present, and when I switch into using OSL, you know, and sometimes when people struggle with like, oh, what does that mean? Right? And so if another deaf person sees me using OSL, they're like, oh, I've never seen that. And then I'll explain it. And they're always quite amazed and they go right into the history with me into detail. And they can really understand what that would look like in the visualization of what that means, you know, in comparison with you know, the broader community, deaf community, they are starting to have that understanding and starting to understand with certain presentations or the Indigenous lens, you know, and how, you know, things are kind of expressed or used in language is dependent on where you are from, your identity, your culture, your community, right? It's not all, you know, Indigenous is all the same, right? And so when someone's having that struggle and trying to understand, you know, sometimes when you bring in as ASL interpreter, most of the time they are non-Indigenous and you notice that there's just that disconnect with that interpretation that is provided. It's almost just like commentary, just kind of providing the word level message. There's not that deeper level. And it's, you know, not meaning that like, you know, it's not like the perfect or clear, but sometimes you can just catch within certain context of how they're signing. And sometimes I'm like, no, I need a little bit more, right? Like you need that bridge in between each idea, right? So there's quite a few different layers with interpreting in Indigenous contexts. So sometimes they can't interpret fluidly the whole way. Sometimes there has to be intrusions where the interpreter was like, oh, well, this is what we said, but then they give an example, right? And so it's kind of frustrating to have that disconnect when trying to access our, you know, knowledge and traditions with that type of barrier and relying on that source, right? So you want to have more fluid connection, right? They should have somebody, you know, that that interaction of understanding, right? Because sometimes an interpreter doesn't have that conversation with somebody, right? So they should have somebody with them to be able to provide that support. And so sometimes I'll give them certain, things and certain concepts to think about. And so for just as a simple example, sometimes, I'll see interpreters struggle with when people are standing up to introduce what nation they are from, right? And so that's just an impact on that interpreter having to spell out letter by letter those nations, right? Which impacts that accessibility for us because it takes a lot longer, right? For each nation, right? So sometimes we need to maybe take a pause in that approach and discuss within the ASL community certain signs that can be decided on for different nations that are practical to the nature of where that is, so we can have a faster understanding of that when you're using ASL and a faster communication of that. But when you look at it through North America and Indigenous communities, they're kind of out in that sense. That's why they rely on spelling letter by letter each community instead of in ASL. There's certain signs for certain cities and towns because it's a faster, smoother way of communicating, but that doesn't apply because they're so out of the Indigenous community. So sometimes one moment for the interpreter. So sometimes there's that disconnect, with accessing information through the interpreters. So, each individual who is deaf, and they should have that pride and understanding and identity where they come from and be able to decide on the sign that would represent their nation, right? And so we shouldn't have that intrusion when we're accessing information through an interpreter, right? So sometimes when certain people stand up, right? Somebody is, speaking in their language, right? Because I don't speak Oneida in spoken language, right? But when I'm watching somebody speak in Oneida and representing the language, right? And then I'm realizing that the other person that is standing there with them, they're kind of supporting each other, right? So if they're signing in OSL and speaking Oneida language, right? You rely on both, right? Even as a hearing person, like the visual gives you a different understanding as well as hearing it. So they support each other. And so sometimes my mother will be called on to give the Thanksgiving address. And so I'm proud when they ask her, to get up there, and that the community is willing to support each other in both languages, because in those settings, we don't need to bring in an external interpreter. We are building a community. We have it both in spoken and sign language, and you have it in the most natural, quickest and clear communication approach. So when I step outside of our community within Canadian society and how Canadians, and I want to be very specific, that Canadians would like to support deaf individuals, or, in whatever context that means, it's most of the time it's not working together or supporting each other. Most of the time that means we'll bring in an interpreter and, just rely on that interpreter. And I asked them, why do we need the interpreter for the whole process? And they're saying, oh, for, communication, right? But for the Canadian kind of context, they want to rely on that for the communication. But that's what I've noticed. They always want to bring in the interpreter as a Canadian perspective. But it's like, you don't like really want to work alongside with me, right? Because when I see an interpreter, like it's not of anybody from our community, they're saying, no, we want, deaf people involved, right? But it's very like in autism, or, want you to come to a workshop because it's in relation to disability. So they want deaf people to show up, to be there, to watch me. Like, you come sit here and you watch me talk about this, and, just go on and on, right? So it's showing their knowledge. They're the ones that are sitting there saying, look at me and watch me share my knowledge through an interpreter. So we just show up and just sit there the whole time. And that happens again and again and again. That's the same type of context where you're invited to work with them. And so that's not my understanding. If my understanding is to work together, you want everybody to share their knowledge. You want to allow everybody to have a part of the stage. You want everybody to see that somebody else contribute. We don't necessarily always need an interpretation, right? So for me, that's the differences I've noticed within Canadian society, and when you're wanting to work together or you're wanting to collaborate on something, whether that is language or sign specific, I don't depend on bringing an interpreter. If we're going to work together, it's going to be, us working together between us, right? Canadian society, view is, oh, we can't understand each other, so I need to bring in an interpreter, right? And so once that whole interaction is done with the interpreter, they feel like, oh, that was great success, right? But I asked them at the end of the whole scenario, what did you learn? Did you learn anything? Did you pick up any sign? And they are just kind of stunned and they have no response. So that means because you relied on the interpreter, you kind of, everything went over your head. You didn't catch on to anything. You didn't learn anything about the language. And so they don't understand any meaning of the language. And so it's kind of like their blind spot because they have the interpreter. They're not even really paying attention to, any of the signs that are being produced while we're communicating or working together. And so that's the type of scenario that I don't want to contribute to if we're going to be communicating but don't have that intention behind it, or that learned benefit reciprocal interaction. Sometimes when that interaction where you're really communicating and it's really reciprocal, it actually is a reflection of reality and living life as well. I don't have an interpreter with me 24 hours, 7 days a week. That is just not possible. So it's just really important to have successful communication requires both parties to be involved in interacting. When you go to conferences or go to other, certain situations like that, like for example, when and I've met a Navajo individual and they're like, oh, what do you do? I usually don't want to rely on the interpreter. And they'll say, you don't want to use the interpreter? I was like, no, I want to have that connection with you, with various individuals from different tribes. I want to have that interaction with you because we can understand our intention and our meaning behind those signs because we have that reality lived experience. We have, witnessed through our lifetime, right? So that is a common theme among Indigenous people from various tribes, right? We are wanting to attempt and learn from each other, right? And we're in Canadian society, they always just want to rely on the interpreter and they just want to hire an interpreter and bring in an interpreter and it's a reliance tool, right? And so for them, interpretation means it's a service, right? And so I want to connect with you. I want to communicate with you. And so we need to have that process and we need to facilitate language to be able to have that be successful, right? So sometimes later on, they'll ask me for feedback, after certain situations. And One more for the interpreter. So when I'm talking about meeting that individual that was from Navajo tribe, it's not like a kind of communication where it's necessarily like we're speaking the same language, but we are connecting with, the visual representation. We understand our, certain body movements. We understand certain concepts. We have the shared understanding. So we just can pick it up well because we have the same shared experiences. Whereas another individual, maybe it's more limited or more of denial, or maybe they haven't connected or done any reflection, right? They're kind of more limited in their communication, So I always express to everybody when I sign, it has connection within me. There's meaning, and some people will be like, oh, wow, you sign really fast. And I'm like, I know, but that's just how I am. That is me. That's my natural way of communicating, way of signing. And so I do try to reflect, and when you're in kind of like a group discussion, or you're discussing certain topics. One more for the interpreter. So when you hunt a buffalo, right, and you have that, you need to show that respect and that thanks to the buffalo because you gave up your life to nourish me, right? So we naturally understand that, and we naturally, know that cycle, right? And so if you overhunt and kill like many buffalo, that just portrays our weakness. Do you have that shared common understanding, right? So we want control, right? And so it's that sense of like being lost. And so, in the north, for them to do certain things to be able to get from point A to B, they rely on the dog sled, right? And so in their area, it also is a strong sense of lifestyle, right? So like, if somebody comes in and is like, oh, dogs are dirty, dogs, they just have all this negative, stereotypes against the dog, and start killing them all, right? It just leads to disaster and negative impacts. And for our people, we have a lot of knowledge with the cornfield. And you have other individuals who come to it with, the whole process of, harvesting the cornfield, and they don't like it, and so they're like, oh, just burn it, right? But for us, you're destroying all of our food, right? And so they do that just for the intention of gaining control, right? So when you discuss communication and how to use language, and then somebody comes in and interrupts that and says, you have to learn English. We are just used to English, right? But ironically, anybody, who speaks English, they don't know how to communicate or don't know another language. They just rely on English, right? And so when they go to another part of the world, they don't understand that language or don't learn it, right? And so why do they not have that skill? And why do so many parts of the world have been exposed to the colonial language of English, right? Because they are stuck when somebody doesn't know how to speak English. So that colonial aspect that has trapped our people and has, had the impacts on the buffalo, the cornfield, and other very negative impacts that have disrupted our life and our traditions. It's we already understand that it's really not the focus is, oh, because you have a disability. Really it's the point of English language communication and to have full understanding. When you go to various conferences, you'll always hear, the topic about how do we avoid English? How do we get to a point where there's no English, right? And I was like, well, why don't you just not speak any English, right? So, um, you know, in the deaf community, there is international sign language. So there's no like one mainstream sign like English, right? So when me and mom travel to different areas in the world, and there's no English language or signs or anything, we can still interact with the human being that's in from that country, that we don't speak the same language, but we can interact quite comfortably and fluidly with understanding. Whereas a hearing person, when they go to different part of the world and there's no English, sometimes they lose all sense of understanding and they can't communicate, right? So for us, it's a lot more fluid and easier, and I've been there, I've experienced it, I've witnessed it, in various settings and approaches to communications through my lifetime, right? And I've witnessed and seen, hearing people who only know English and how they struggle, right? So internationally deaf people don't struggle as in comparison to hearing people. And internationally, different sign languages, there's over 300. And New Zealand, the Maori people have their own sign language. There's Mayan sign language from South America, and so there's lots of various sign languages around the world. And so that again is not new, it's historical, it's always been here, right? And you can see how their language shows their culture, and every place in the world you can see their culture through their language.
Thanks so much. Oh my goodness. I'm not sure if just to add on to like what you were saying, Dominique. I had the privilege of going to New Zealand to NASA and went to the workshop for the Maori the Maori Sign Language workshop. And they also spoke about a little bit about OSL and a little bit about the Plains sign. And I'm not sure how familiar you are, and I'm not sure if like what I'm reiterating what was shared with me there, how accurate I am at resharing that. But they said that before colonization across Turtle Island, like a lot of our like from nation to nation, we were using sign because it was a universal thing, because maybe not every nation or community understood other communities and their language. So I was like, that was like a real like I don't know, I found that so powerful that like you said, like why aren't more people using it? And that was a question I wanted to ask, was that what's your stance, or how do you feel about others that are not Oneida, or others that may not be from the same community, and learning OSL, like I guess personally between yourself and Marsha, how do you both feel about either whether they're hearing or not Oneida, like also learning OSL. I was just curious.
I feel that's empowerment. Like if somebody's interested, I feel that can only be beneficial. And to have that interaction, it's very natural. And I feel like it will help keep, communication, going. Whereas within ASL, sometimes you can feel like sometimes there's misunderstandings, sometimes there's like hesitations, right? And when you're using OSL, I noticed that for another individuals for from their cultural perspective, right? Because sometimes there's certain things that I notice that is not our culture from Oneida, and so sometimes I'll ask them, like, because I don't understand and it's not clear to me because I don't know your culture, so they'll then give me an example, um to like they'll visually show me something like on how to do something, then that can give me an understanding and help come up with like a translation to truly show that intent and that meaning behind the culture. And they'll say, oh, and then I'll ask them after I come up with a sign for that, concept or, what they're discussing, they'll say, yes, that does make sense. And after we have that interaction, I'll tell them that's not mine because that's not from my culture, that's yours. You can take that sign and you can keep it because it is affiliated with your culture and your language, right? So sometimes we are reached out to give assistance or guidance in the sense of appropriate sign that's more based in culture and rooted from that perspective. So when you're having that interaction, right, and you have, it doesn't necessarily always mean it's like that fluid, fast, conversational. Sometimes when you are using OSL, you want to really focus on setting the foundation first. Because if there's no foundation, the rest of my signing, if it's fast and lots there, it's incomplete without the foundation. So you always want to make sure that the basic foundation is set and you have that understanding. Then you can progress into the next steps and after that. And I'm not talking about like we won't focus on that now, but in the future later on when we have more people that have the knowledge, that fluency and that pace will naturally come as the language grows and develops and people learn and use it. And there's be certain, for right now, it's slow process, like one sign at a time, one phrase at a time. It's not to the level where you can have a fluid conversation nonstop. Right now, our team is about 3 or 4 of us. So our OSL is not to the point of that fluency yet. I feel like when OSL is being used by at least 100 people or more, then we will have that natural fluency and flow of a language. Right now, it's just 3 or 4 of us, so it's a very slower, smaller process in utilizing the language, right? I hope to get to one day where I can have a daily life of being able to use OSL. Right now, that's not the experience because we are still in that developing progress, developing and growing the language, right? So it's very, very slow process right now. And a lot of discussion based on what the meaning is and, what does that mean, and making sure that each person has the comprehension and that somebody else would understand it. And so a lot of people we get interested in OSL, they'll say, oh, I've seen ASL, I know ASL and accessibility. but they still struggle even though they have ASL. Like, sometimes we'll go to workshops or present workshops, and then we'll get, a lot of people replying saying, "Oh, it's so clear. It's not confusing at all. It's very clear. I understand it, and I only want more," right? So I noticed that impact after a workshop with OSL. It has that type of powerful impact and leaving people wanting more and them feeling that natural guidance to rely on it more. And so from what I experience, I do think, it's great and it's been an amazing and realization.
Also, just to add, Marsha's saying, when you're talking about PISL, that's something that has historically been used by hearing people as well. The Plains Indian Sign Language, it was used when they would gather at their teepees, and they came together as a community and made a resource that it's nothing fancy. It's just a soft cover booklet that they had collaborated together to make and document this sign language that they used for the different goings on in their culture. And that kind of really just exploded as well. And I think and something people get fascinated by because it's all in the hands. There's no facial expressions or anything that happens with it. And so I was curious about it and I was looking through that booklet and I realized that, oh, like this is really interesting. I don't know why it didn't go any further than it did. Why is there just this one resource about this sign language and this nation's use of it? But I realized it's because it's been taken from them too. It's something that was historically there and then taken from them, like so many things have been. But it's so important for all of us to keep these things going for the whole world because everybody does benefit from it. And it wasn't right to be taken away from us. And it really caused a lot of damage where now we have to go back and repair and reclaim a lot of that stuff that was taken and try to remember it. And it takes a long time, but sign languages in particular, I mean, if you've seen my presentation, you know, there's so much symbolism that relates to our families and our relations and our culture with hunting or with elders, hearing elders talking about that kind of thing and their memories of all of these events that they use signs for. And you know, it was very visual historically that people understood each other. You know, a sign like this, everybody knows exactly what you're supposed to do and what it means when you're out hunting. We've always had that, but it's been taken from us. And so it's good to be aware of that and to understand how, you know, we've been given this language of English and ASL and how it's taken away our voice and it's taken away our experiences. And we were kind of scared into learning it and relying on it, and how now we have so much trauma related to that and issues that come up that you know, there's been so many changes throughout history that have been really, really terrible that cause us to not understand how we feel about a lot of stuff. So there's a huge impact on people who have experienced trauma or who have experienced their languages being taken away, and their sign languages that their communities have had being taken away also. And so that's why I think it's so important to advocate about it, because that's a part of us that's missing. And how can we get it back? And the reason that it was taken is because they knew that that's a piece of us, that's a piece of who we are, and they leave us with this trauma that leads to all of these other problems like addiction and things that just kind of snowball into the society that we have now. And so we have to understand, you know, you have to understand who you are, and we have to look at our mental health especially and how we can heal that. there's lots of people talking about it now, and they're saying, "Oh, go get help, go get help." But what is that help? We historically have help and healing built into our traditions, into our culture. We are already rich with all of this knowledge. So you can't take away that knowledge from us and then tell us to heal from it in your ways. We have it embedded in us already. We are strong. We can advocate for ourselves, and we just need this knowledge given back to us and shared within our communities to be able to actually heal from it. But people don't think about that very often. We have to keep back with our ways because our ways are strong. And that is how we get through all of the horrific things that have ever happened to us. That's how we can decolonize. That is, it's really, really sad when you think about it. And people are always asking, how do we do this? How do we do this? And I always say, we can beat them. We have our cultures. We have our communities that we can talk with each other. And that's why I always do presentations, and I feel very passionate about it because I'm trying to say, come on, we have to work together. I can't do this by myself. We need people to work together to get this done. And I've been in government rooms. I've been, talking to different officials, and I've gone all of the places and talked to so many people just to try to get them to see that. And I don't know where else I could go at this point, because we're still struggling. We're still weak in that. We don't have that understanding. No matter how many presentations we do, no matter how widespread we send our message, it's not always understood because there's that gap there. So we just need to keep doing it more. I'm always advocating for deaf people to get more access, and that slowly spreads, but it's something that honestly, it's because this was taken away from us, and the way they tell us to heal from it is through their ways. But I feel very strongly that if we can keep with our cultures, if we can advocate for our own languages, including sign languages, to be revitalized, rather than learning English, learning to speak, all of that kind of stuff. It's honestly, it's a load of bullshit, to be quite honest. I don't want to, I'm being completely serious here. I mean, it's funny, but it really, that's not our ways.
Generally, the time. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just would like to emphasize that we do need to continue with OSL and develop it and have it grow. And we would like to get to the point where we utilize and rely on OSL, right? Because nowadays, when I'm looking at disability, the laws, all those impacts and, what it looks like today and what it means today, and having various, conversations and the political lens as well. But really at the root of it, my understanding with my grandmothers and my ancestors and coming from the land and our history, and how all of that accumulates and creates, our understanding with the great law of peace, right? And representation of what's important is to follow the mother clan and to have that recognition and to have that solid protection of our families. And it's the women who lead in the voting for chief and the political roles, and so as well as taking care of the children, right? It's the women, right? And they are very powerful, and that is our clan system as well. It's very strong and powerful, and the women lead, and it's emphasize that they, stand up, they follow, the great law of peace, and we value, the life-giving of, women, right? And so in everything that is entailed with that, in that being, and this future 7 generations. And when I look at all of that, that makes me want to stand within that power and recognize that empowerment.
too.
And I am, a woman, but at the same time, I view that as like loss of empowerment, right? Without the language, there's certain things that are disconnected or taken away, right? So when I have to go to discuss about, politics, it's usually geared towards disability politics or conversation. And I'm like, no, but that's not what my purpose is, like my politics, you know, I want to look at it from the lens of my nation and my people and what you took away from our people, right? So um, I just know within myself, with my own within knowledge that has, and traditions of our grandmothers and my aunts and mothers and our ancestors, that is, my identity. That's, what I would follow, not what, society, being involved in conversations that just take my energy, that kind of are conversations are to take, the goal is to take control, right? So with OSL, we want to take that empowerment back and to rely on our systems, our family systems, our clan systems, and to have that natural, interaction between one individual to another without intrusion, that we are, similar or the same, to be able to have that same understanding, right? And so when you have um, two different languages and you're trying to communicate with the two different languages, that just creates that distance and that disconnect, and becomes, where you don't understand those people, you don't understand, right? So like with disability or the government, they just want to look at it from the medical perspective. And so, that's where we lose that sense of power, because they hire all these people, right, to discuss disability, and they ask us questions, but where are those, where's my nation, where are my people, right? So it's good for nations to recognize what has been taken from us, and when you look at it within the disability, there should not be relying on outsourcing to, various resources. It should stay within community, and you should stick together, as a community, right? So, if a mother has, children that are disabled or that are deaf, right, they'll usually, if they come and take that child away from you, how would you feel, right? So in urban settings, they have various resources, so sometimes, they'll move out of community to urban setting for those resources, right? And so, but you were able to have that strong connection to your community and that identity, right? But when you left looking for other resources and other support, you also created that disconnect from the community. And so parents who have children that have disabilities, like, enough is enough. You can't rely on these out resources. You have to come back within community and rely on community. And I don't want to focus on communication that is, the focus is to take out of the community. I want to focus on my community with my people, and all of us working towards it together. When I want to communicate with somebody, I want to communicate with my community, with my people. I don't want to have to leave to, source out a resource out of the community, or sometimes to have communication, or you have to have a need, then you have to like ask and kind of get approval. Like imagine, if that's the case, right? So like when we communicate, and then you have people, that are, in Canadian society, right? They come and they set up certain things, and, for me to communicate, they have to, go through this process of approval, right? Just to be able to communicate. And so it's just like that type of structure, that type of approach just feels wrong. So if you have, individuals together, communicating together, you're on the same land, that is communication, that is yours, right? Nobody owns that. That's yours to own and keep. You guys are the decision makers. You guys are the ones that are empowered and involved in that communication, right? Because you guys are the ones involved within that communication every day, right? So you don't have individuals or other people bringing policies in, right? Like, oh, do you want an interpreter? Oh, we'll have to see if there's, funds available, right? Or all these other layers of process or, red tape, or we have to go through and ask a manager to see if we can get an interpreter for the communication. Or do you want access, to somebody that signs, or do you not want that option in sign? Like that process just feels very confusing and wrong to me, right? So if you are within a nation and there's language being used and conversations being had, it is your right to have access. You have the right to enter into your home territories where these events or communications are happening. You have the right to access them. You don't have to leave them, right? So sometimes, people look at it as like, oh, well, do we want to put that version out there using sign language? Like, I don't know why there's this theory of you need to ask, right? Like, we can understand that and can say that it's a human right to have language access, and that includes sign language. But that has to go beyond just words. There actually has to be action. Right now, it's just a lot of talk and no action, and, for other, sign languages, we would love to see other spoken languages have their own sign languages. But right now, it's moving at a very slow pace where we're not seeing that. So I have gone through certain experiences where, we are deciding on a sign for OSL, and there's been disagreements and people saying, I don't agree with, your process or how you've come to that sign. My mom has experienced that with her, interactions and providing different presentations. And it's fine, for somebody to say they don't agree with a certain sign or don't agree with that process, right? But they are coming through as a person through the disabled lens, right? If they are another deaf individual and they use sign, they are classified as disabled, like, period, right? It's one moment for the interpreter. Individuals who have hearing loss, it is a possibility for any human being, and people lose their hearing at various stages in life, right? And so it's a possibility for everybody, and then everybody would be disabled, classified as disabled, period. So which means that with the community being inclusive and involved, it lessens that what disabled looks like. So you should rely on that within your community and not relying on that without external, society resources. And that the hearing loss could be a possibility and impact any individual.
Yeah, I agree, like 100% with all that was shared. And yeah, there's so many perspectives of that we have to look at with revitalization of any language, especially sign language. There's so many different aspects to it that people don't think about or they don't talk about. And so it's good. I'm hoping that we can kind of help bring this to light through this platform. And then hopefully we can, spread that message and help people understand in our own communities and then the broader community outside of like throughout Canada.
Turtle Island.
Definitely. Right.
Sorry, Monty. I'm just
Yeah, that's a good correction to be made there.
excuse me. I just wanted to say that I won't I'm sure Monty's on the same page as me, but I'm like, we need to have you back because I could talk all night or I could listen and share space with you all night. And I know it's been several hours and whatnot. And I think where we landed was a great place to end off this evening, but we need to stay connected, and I don't want to force Monty into another episode, but would love to speak with you again, or share space with you again. I think there's so much to be said and so much to share, and just I'm blown away. The word that keeps coming up for me is just powerful, empowerment. I just keep hearing that over and over again. Just feeling that, and even I'm not Oneida whatsoever. Monty is, but I have had the privilege of working with several Oneida individuals and have learned a little bit more about the culture. And so, I finally remembered my point way back when, and that was that when you use the sign to have and having the basket on, I was like, oh, I actually know that reference now. Not that we don't have our own baskets in our Anishinaabe culture, with the straps and everything, but we were gifted one and we take one around to the classroom every day where I work. And so it was just, again, that's something that I've just been thinking about and ruminating about, and just how powerful all of that was. And what I have to share is nothing compared to what you've been able to express and share with us this evening. And like I said, I don't know if you're interested or not, but we should keep talking. We should keep in contact with one another. I'd love to hear more, to share more space, and I don't know how. Yeah, I don't know how that looks, but I can't thank you enough, Yanko, Miigwech.
I just want to add, I don't know if I have the words to say it correctly. I just know how powerful, in Oneida culture, such a matriarch culture where the women lead, and a lot of our indigenous cultures are like that. And I think it's just been more suppressed, I guess, by the Western culture of how we perceive that. But I'm just I'm inspired by your strength and your perseverance and your message of keeping going and pushing through and trying to keep getting the message out about OSL and just Indigenous languages in general, and how we need to trust in our ways, trust in our own ways of being, and not relying on this other culture for ours to survive or for us to keep going. And so I'm just really, really proud of you for being able to persevere through all of that, and even through things that I haven't been through, like, being in the deaf community and going through what all that entails, the perseverance with that. And so I'm just inspired and proud of you that you're the work that you're doing, and I hope that you never lose that drive of to keep going. And yeah, I'm just I don't know what the word is, flattered, or just honored to have you on our platform that we have. And yeah, I hope it resonates with people as much as it has with me.
Yeah, you've really gifted us a lot this evening, without without an extractive way. It's like you've really gifted, I think, a lot of people, not just myself, but like I say, like, I'm a very emotional person, but I'm like, you gifted a lot to me, and I'm just really appreciative, like you said, of trying to step into this into my path through revitalization with the same amount of dignity, strength, determination. Like, it's given me like a bit of a boost in not just in revitalization, but just as a woman, just as a person. So I want to say thank you again.
Is there anything that you guys have, like I don't know, resources you want to share about, or about promoting OSL, or if you're at that stage yet, or if that's your plans on doing that?
We have distributed USB drives. We are actually, they've been all taken. And so we had about 50 who wanted to learn. Sorry, one moment for the interpreter. So we've been running our own Instagram. You can follow Oneida-ASL. I'm sure you'll be able to show the link of our Instagram. Our Instagram is not, updated, as often, like every day. Apologize for that. We don't have the time. It is occasionally updated, so you can just access it to see various videos. And we started to develop a website that's in progress. The intention for the website is for community to be able to see any future plans, if they want to be involved in certain workshops, or to be able to kind of to show certain videos, for good, shareable information. That's the intent for the website. And really the first step, if you are interested, is to contact us, because our goal is that interaction, and we would, enjoy being able to support and have that support for you, and, conversation. And we could send you, different video links during that interaction. And so really that's what we value, is that personal interaction. Sometimes if somebody contacts us and we just send them a video and then that's it, that's not really our approach. Sometimes we'll ask you, what's your intent? Why are you interested in OSL? And the context of who this individual is important. And this is not only for Oneida Nation only. I have had interest, from, people that are Mohawk or, various areas in Ontario, in New York, in Wisconsin, Quebec. There's been exposure in all those areas within North America, Turtle Island. And so we are witnessing our 6 nations, just collaborating and communicating together. Within our tribe, there's those 6 languages, right? Sister languages. There's the Mohawk, and Oneida, and we can have that interaction and that communication and have that, same understanding. And so I feel like this is a new process of having, minds opened and eyes opened and to be able to build strength off of. And so I've had really good conversations, between Mohawk and Oneida, and it started in Quebec. And so, it is growing, but it has started, and it's just nice to see the interest and the growth. And of course, like anything else, it will just take time. And also don't be shy, reach out to us, introduce yourself. We are very open-minded. We are very interactive and willing to partake in, conversations. Very similar concept with, how you are already used to, getting together with community, for any, cultural reason, sometimes you get together, in terms of mentorship, you'll meet up networking with individuals to, mentorship between your 2 nations or your 2 cultures, right? And so, when you take that concept and you're trying to apply it to learning sign language, you want that same type of mentorship, somebody who is fluent, somebody who is deaf, and have that lived experience. And so we have that language fluency in ASL. And so, really what's the most important is that mentor, because it is impossible to do that individual learning, and it's the same within our communities, right? If you take a cultural, lesson or tradition, you usually have that mentorship within community, right? And so the same applies here, right? You're involved in, your various community or family conversations, and you're always observing. And so the same approach, goes when you're learning sign language, to have that exposure in the different contexts and different environments. You watch videos, you attend, certain events or settings to see conversations happening. It's not just relying on like only closed caption or only one certain type of, signs or certain conversations, right? There's a lot of ways that misunderstandings can happen, right? So just depending on relying on the source language and then learning the sign language, but we actually take the approach, the opposite way, just by the exposure and seeing, various users using the language signing. And we don't rely on like the books and the videos right away. And so you want to make sure when you're interacting and you're learning that you build that trust within your mentorship of a deaf individual, because if you don't build that trust and you don't build that understanding, with your mentor, like for me, sometimes when people come up to me and sign, sometimes if I don't understand them, I will be honest with them, be like, I have no idea what you're signing, right? And so I can, usually detect, somebody's kind of skill with their language use or their background. I can really tell when they sign. And so sometimes when they're come to me and sign, I can tell their approach hasn't been, an appropriate approach to learning the language. So if you, engage with us to come and have a conversation, it is important to also listen with that understanding and learning intent, and not to just allow your ego to guide you, because our comments or our feedback is an attempt to guide you, right? So if you approach me and you have an ego and you have like, I know what's best already, and I really am kind of, I'll shut the conversation down, and I can detect it right away, so I have the lived experience. I have the fluency in sign language, whether it's ASL or OSL. And so I have the experience of being involved in various, settings, like within community. I've had the international, travels for Irish Sign Language and just various sign languages. I've gone and studied, ASL curriculum and their approach to how their curriculum is designed. I have an advanced level of experience of these variety of experiences I've been involved with, and I've gone to various workshops and conferences where it's only in sign language. There's no interpreters or anything. And so I've gone to those type of events, and I've seen other hearing individuals attend those events, not as to interpret them or as an interpret, just to go and partake into the activity. And so I've met like a Cree deaf person, but really the point I'm trying to get to is that if you are a hearing individual that goes to these same approach, like you're already starting from behind, from a deficit, right? So I come from that community of being deaf and having the fluency in sign language. I have that lived experience within my community. I can't speak for other Indigenous communities, but the intent for me is to bring forward and to portray, sorry for the interpreter's pronunciation, Haudenosaunee. And so to have that interaction, with various people, right? So if we don't portray our culture or don't provide the explanation or the meaning, then who is going to do it, right? So Marsha and myself want to bring our culture forward, want to show our nation, and to show, have our rights, portrayed as well. And so who's leading that currently at the moment? It's we are, right? So we're the ones being proactive and involved in the process and discussions, and it is spreading internationally. We are getting contacts internationally now reaching out to us, where it was before it was only within Canada. And so Marsha feels very proud that our nation and representation of our nation is spreading and having a great impact. And to have people recognizing OSL and recognizing Marsha. And I always tell my mom, you cannot ever retire. No, it doesn't matter where you go, you're going to have people chasing you and giving you the spotlight. And she just laughs.
Yanko, Dominique.
Yeah, so say Yanko again. Monty, I think you're on mute.
Oh yeah,
I
just
think your mic is off, or you're too far. We can barely hear you.
Oh, me?
Yes.
I'm just relaxing, listening. Sat back too far. I was just saying, like, thank you, Yanko, again. And then I just asked Monty if he had anything. I told him his mic was off, and then if he was trying to say something.
oh just yeah, I just everything was just good that you shared, and yeah, I don't know what else to say, because it's kind of mind blowing. So
Which is what Monty had to say when he first told me he wanted to have you on the podcast. He just kept telling me, like, I couldn't, my mind is blown. It's, oh my God, there's so much to share. And I was just like, oh, like I just got so excited. So I've been waiting. I'm so glad this finally happened because I've been waiting a long time to make it happen. And I know we have to coordinate quite a few people, and I'm really happy that we were able to. So, yeah, I'm really glad that like the culture is really leading, and you guys are also leading, and Marsha, that you probably won't retire. That's
Yeah, well, I'm doing pretty good so far health-wise, so
awesome. Well, we say, yeah, Yanko, and thank you again, and miigwech, and we hope that you have a wonderful, restful sleep this evening. And yeah, if you need
this
anything,
is thank you.
oh,
yes. So the ASL sign is like this, thank you. But for us in Oneida Sign Language, we are always connected to the land. So the creator and the land. So we say Yanko.
so, oh, just yeah, okay,
Just like this,
Yanko.
yes.
Okay, okay. I don't know why I didn't ask that earlier.
Well, it's great to think about too, because we're always, like I said, we're connected to the land. It shows that connection that we have that is very unique.
I would just also like to mention that, as we went over that sign for Yanko, we've, as discussed through, the process of this podcast, for just more kind of for Indigenous communities to open awareness, to open discussion, because they have not yet had, the opportunity, right? Because they have had, barriers or other things that just have not allowed them to have the opportunity to have, to meet somebody, to have a discussion. So I'm very thankful that you guys were wanting to have and bring this discussion to light. And so to be able to have this podcast reach, your listeners, and if, that means more exposure and people wanting to reach out for resources or for, maybe their own podcast, that we are open to just, having this reach to a broader audience and any opportunities that might lead to as well. Thank you for opening that.
Yes, of course.
Yanko.
That's the point. Sorry. Yeah, awesome.
Okay. Well, it's good to see you again. Hope to see you again soon.
Yes, we'll hopefully see you again soon. I hope everybody has a safe and a good night.
That makes sense. Yes. Have a good night. Thank you.
Oh.
Also, just for context, we never use the word bye in our language, goodbye. So I've never understood, like I see the word bye and it means death, that's the end. That's the end of it all. And so I always like to hug and say, we'll see you later. We'll see you again. I never use the word bye. So I think it's really important. English is so silly sometimes. Bye. I'm never going to see you again.
We have that in common. We don't have a goodbye in Anishinaabe either. So, yes, we will see you later, wherever that is on our path.
Yes, of course. Thank you. So hugs.
Take care.
Okay. Yeah. Take care.
Just would like to say thank you to the interpreters as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Chimigwech Gobzindawye Kinawea. Thanks so much for listening to our podcast and weighing our sound. To reach us, by email. Find us at oursound.podcast@gmail.com. You can find all of our links to Buy Me a Coffee, Patreon, Instagram, etc. at our link tree, which is linktr.ee/nwaying.oursound. Our theme song was done by myself, Nin Mashkogabwitkwe, and artwork completed by Nashime, my younger brother, Brent Beauchamp. Chimigwech.